Hi, I'm the product of over 2 decades of propaganda, and I recently finished watching the hopefully last season of Squid Game. When I watched the first season of Squid Game, I loved it, and I hoped that the show would end right there with Jae-hoon finally choosing his daughter for once in his life. And obviously, my prayers weren't answered. And after Squid Game made Netflix a lot of money, spawned all sorts of sponsored product, and unlocked a whole new level of what we all hoped were only 7 levels of hell. I mean, the Mr. Beast industrial complex. Hell, we are here today staring at each other across each other's screens. I'm going to say a few things outright right now so that we are all on the same page. Season 1 of Squid Game was a critique of capitalism, how it exploits, how it dehumanizes, kills, how it creates the fictive idea that we have free will when our lives are delineated and informed by the decisions of people who died, should have died, or who are knocking on Mr. Beast's door, hell's door. I say this because while this probably is very obvious to some people, that the capitalist critique went over a lot of people's head because, say it with me, we are the product of over X years of capitalist propaganda, which is why people did notice the very obvious anti-capitalist overtones of the show. And then season 2 happened and it sucked, but if you squint, you could argue that it's a critique of individualism. Ji-hoon failed to destroy these games because from the onset and throughout, he was acting based on individual qualms with the game and in the silly idea that getting to the VIP lounge would somehow end them. It also shows how well organized the capitalist machinery is, how easy it is for informants to infiltrate poorly organized anti-hegemonic organizations, and the futility of electoral politics. But you have to put your whole sociology into making these arguments. I don't fault people for not making them. Season 2 was badly made and lacked a strong ideological narrative, but it still had something to say. It was like a 4-year-old in a way. Most of what came out of its mouth was a blubbering, incoherent mess, but it had a few moments of lucidity, and now you have to sit down and think about why it is that only big girls are allowed to eat ice cream after 8. Season 3 is like punishment for people's misapprehension of the core message of Squid Game that can only be likened to the Joker too. It's so bad that all you can do is open your mouth and start a sentence and just give up on it halfway because I'm a Virgo didn't make sense. I don't know if I'm just not smart enough or what, but it was so obscure as to be incoherent. And based on my understanding, the show uses cootie, pronounced cooties, like the thing that kids have when they're 6 or something. A 13 feet tall 13 who's been locked away in his adoptive parents' house for 19 years to critique racial capitalism, the American love for rule of law and the carceral state, and the racist and anti-poor motivations underpinning service delivery failures in black and brown neighborhoods. Cootie isn't the only physically different character as his love interest has super speed. Side note, the show gives one of the coolest depictions of how a person with super speed would experience life. So that was really well done. And his new activist friend has a propaganda superpower that makes crowds agree with whatever she says. The problem with the lattermost character in particular is that she's a bunch of contradictions. She has a liberalism tattoo on her neck, which could be ironic or could be literal, and she has a lot of liberal tendency, although she self-identifies as a communist. I say she has liberalist tendencies because she keeps talking about how the people should be empowered to liberate themselves, but her idea of liberation is linked to peaceful protest, which you know. Also, she is willing to manipulate her girlfriend into staying with her through her propaganda power, which is not great. So say it with me. I'm the product of X years of anti-capitalist propaganda. Obviously, the director, Boots Riley, a communist who has actually participated in community organizing, may be stopping short of calling for violent revolution because, the show aired on Prime and Amazon Studios was involved in its production. So there's a problem I'll come back to later. For now, I will say that the form of propaganda the girl in the show makes is unlike that we usually come across in society, which makes things interesting. But I feel like it may have been a bit of a misstep to equate counter-hegemonic narratives with something that robs audiences of agency, unless, of course, she's supposed to represent liberalism, which to me isn't all the way clear. I kept wondering if her characterization was intentional, if I'm misinterpreting something, or if her character just wasn't well done. Either way, at the season finale, she managed to convince the villain superhero of the show that hyperpolicing is bad with her propaganda power and he believes her and flies away, seemingly disillusioned with the law, in which case join the club, buddy. But the issues plaguing the community remain firmly in place, and also Cootie has cooties, I think. I don't know, man. Overall, I'm a Virgo is interesting and probably makes sense to someone, just not me. If you understand the bigger picture about what it's trying to say, you understand what it is trying to say. But the allegory in this is nestled in so deeply into the narrative that at least I left the show feeling confused and unsatisfied. There's another Boots Riley production that is super wonky and layered, but that actually makes perfect sense. Sorry to bother you, which is also one of my favorite pieces of media ever. This one is about class consciousness and class solidarity. It shows that the working class cannot work alone to overcome capital, but must work with other oppressed groups in order to free everyone from capitalism's yoke. It also contains very great stuff on racism, especially in its very messy interaction with black men's sexuality and hypersexualization, racial capitalism and class traitors, and the role that the petite bourgeoisie play in upholding relations of economic oppression. In a word, Sorry to Bother You is a masterpiece. The movie follows Cassius Green, yes, the pun is very intentional, who is a down on his luck guy who lands a job as a telemarketer. A bunch of people hang up on him because he speaks with his normal black voice. That is until a black colleague tells him to use his white voice, which is literally a white man's voice. After he switches to this voice, he makes a killing at his job. But the telemarketers here only get paid on a commission. They don't have salaries. They decide to stage a protest so that they can get unionized and get solid salaries. This culminates in these workers essentially doing go slows and having picketers to prevent the power callers from going inside the building. The power callers are essentially these elite callers who work at the top of the building. Literally before the workers start their line protest, but before their first instance of protest action, Cassius gets promoted to a super caller status. He immediately turns his back on his colleagues and decides that he won't join them in their line protest because he wants the new job. He's like, I'll support you guys, but from the sidelines. He gets to the super collar section. Wait, supercharger. I kept writing different things in my script. I forgot if it's power collar, supercharger. So we'll just use the words interchangeably. He gets to the power collar section and learns that these telemarketers sell arms and slave labor in the firm of Work Free, a company people eat, sleep, shit, and live in their place of work all the time. He's initially hesitant to take the job, but decides to just accept it because the salary is insane. A lot of crazy things happen in between, but at the end of the story, he quits from his super collar status and joins the protesters. They eventually succeed with their demands because they get help from these half horse, half people called Aqueous. Just watch the movie. It'll take too long to explain because there's so many things that happen and it's all great. So, its anti capitalism is overt and well articulated, yet, from a bunch of reviews I've seen, the main thing that people were preoccupied with was the white voice, which is interesting. Of course, the white voice is an interesting narrative tool and says a lot about how black people have to code switch in order to succeed in the world of work, and also about how proximity to whiteness as a whole increases the chances of one's upward mobility in society. But the white voice is hardly the most pertinent component of the film. The scene where Army Hammer, the very morbidly perfect character for this role, if you know anything about his personal proclivities, tells Cassius to use his normal voice before offering him $100 million, shows us that the movie isn't about assimilation in and of itself, and yet this is what people became fixated on. This makes me think about the final piece of media under consideration for this video. So this is a 2025 black horror film directed by Ryan Coogler. It deals with overt themes of race and its interactions with culture and cultural identity, belonging, and capitalism. The most overt cultural product in this movie is music. The fact that it is inherently communal and historical, and that white people, even formerly oppressed ones like the Irish, keep trying to steal it from black people for their own personal gain. The implicit element of this is that this theft ends up individualizing a communal good. When one person is chosen as the god of the blues stop belonging to black people as a collective. Mary is important for the staff in belonging as well. She's a white passing woman who would have been classified as black at that time in American history. Although doing so is dangerous for herself and would severely stunt her outcomes, she wishes desperately to be around and be viewed as a black woman. As for the integration between race and capitalism, the movie shows how black capitalism is neither liberatory nor safe. Being rich didn't shield Smoke and Stack from the KKK's overt racism, and it would not have protected them against their planned attacks. Yes, having access to black spaces is empowering, but it didn't liberate the people who went to the juke range from racialized wage slavery. Over and above the musical element, this movie uses vampirism as an allegory for racialized capitalist exploitation. When I first watched the movie, I saw this, but I decided to ignore the idea lest I be viewed as that one friend who's too woke. But then I watched Ryan Coogler's interview with this one lady, which vindicated my wokeness. Woke people are always vindicated, in truth. Ryan Coogler kept saying that the woman who noticed that Sinners is an anti-capitalist film was smart and told her that he's from Oakland, the birthplace of the Black Panther Party and one of the long-standing sides of the black radical tradition in America, but didn't want to agree with her analysis explicitly. You could tell, right? He didn't want to explicitly state that, yes, my movie is anti-capitalist because he wanted the movie to do well in the box office and to protect his overall career as a filmmaker. Which gets me to my point. Whether the piece of anti-capitalist media starts off strong but loses its way, is too obscure, is well done, or is implicit, it will nonetheless fail because it exists within the capitalist machine. Squid Game lost its way because it ironically became Netflix's cash cow, or cash pig, a spectacle critiquing a spectacle. Sinners was directed by a man who's made billions for production companies and is slated to acquire the full rights over his production in less than 30 years, who wants to be able to eat the fruits of his labor. These mechanizations undercut these pieces of media's ability to effectively level critiques against capitalism. The the profit motive, in a sense, promote the profit motive even as they provide dissenting views against capitalism. But there's an added dimension. We are all products of years of capitalist propaganda. I'm a Virgo was a bit too meta, at least for me, to constitute more than a movie that a stoner watches while in the throes of a high. Sorry to bother you, although High Key Perfect was stripped of all its nuance by audiences who couldn't see its very loud and obvious messaging. Even Squid Game was bastardized by its own audience, who complained about the limited focus on the games in season 2, and where Squid Game inspired clothes on Halloween. Are you insane? Simply put, anti-capitalist critiques also fail because we don't see them. Sometimes because they aren't done well, and sometimes because all the products of the pro-capitalist media we've consumed our whole lives that make us almost resistant to noticing and internalizing dissenting views. Obviously, there's a lot of anti-capitalist media out there, and some of it is being done without the backing of capitalist machinery. Even the media that I have mentioned has done a great deal in waking some people up and calling them to action. The video simply sought to illustrate why these pieces of media aren't as effective as they could be, why they fail. What is to be done? Simple, organize. You won't consume your way into a better future.